The 35th floor of the glass tower gleamed in the Sunday afternoon light. Manhattan spread below like a circuit board of ambition and commerce. Inside the conference room, tension crystallized in the air between two people who spoke different languages and needed each other more than either wanted to admit. Victoria Hayes stood at the window, her reflection ghosting against the skyline, watching Sheikh Hassan al-Mansour's advisors gather papers with the efficiency of men who'd witnessed failed negotiations before. 2 years of cultivation, 3 trips to Dubai, countless emails threading hope through time zones. All of it dissolving because her translator had vanished 40 minutes ago without explanation or backup. Hassan spoke in Arabic, the words flowing like sand through fingers Victoria couldn't close. His tone needed no translation. Disappointment had a universal frequency. The advisors nodded, their expressions confirming what she already knew. $40 million in investment, 300 jobs for a city that needed them. Her position as CEO secured or shattered depending on the next 60 seconds. The board would convene Monday morning, Richard Walsh already sharpening his knives, ready to suggest she was too young, too inexperienced, too female for the responsibility they'd reluctantly granted. Hassan stood, his hand reaching for the brushed steel door handle. The gesture carried finality, the kind that ended careers and collapsed opportunities that took years to build. Victoria's CFO whispered urgent calculations beside her, numbers that meant nothing when the fundamental equation had already failed. They needed words. They needed understanding. They needed a miracle that didn't exist in Manhattan on a Sunday afternoon when translation services were closed and desperation tasted like copper in the mouth. Then a voice from the hallway, small and clear as a bell, cast in silver, speaking Arabic with the purity of someone who'd learned it for love rather than commerce. "Peace be upon you, honored uncle." Everyone turned toward the sound. A 6-year-old girl stood in the doorway, blonde hair catching the light, holding a book about astronomy in one hand. Her blue eyes held no fear of interrupting important people doing important things. She simply saw someone who needed help and walked forward with the confidence of children who hadn't yet learned the world had invisible walls between janitors' daughters and billionaire investors. Marcus Chen burst through the door seconds behind her, still gripping his mop, his face flushed with the particular shame of working-class intrusion into spaces designed to exclude him. His daughter had just walked into the most critical business meeting of Victoria Hayes' career, wearing a gap-toothed smile and a dress that had been washed so many times the blue had faded to the color of forget-me-nots. 4 hours earlier, Marcus had woken at 4 in the morning, the nightmare fading like smoke through his fingers. Baghdad, the explosion, the screaming, the same loop his brain insisted on replaying whenever stress accumulated beyond his ability to compartmentalize. He lay in darkness for 3 minutes, breathing the way the VA counselor had taught him, letting the present reassert itself over the past. Queen's apartment, Lily asleep in the next room, Sunday overtime that paid double, winter coat money, rent money, the mathematics of survival that governed every decision. The kitchen was so small, 2 people couldn't stand in it together. But Marcus had learned to move through the space with military precision. Eggs in the pan, bread in the toaster, coffee brewing from grounds he'd stretched across 3 days. The refrigerator hummed its familiar complaint, the sound of an appliance holding on through sheer determination. Lily's drawings covered every surface the landlord's white paint didn't prohibit. Mermaids and astronauts and Arabic calligraphy she'd been practicing for 18 months under Mrs. Amira's patient instruction. He looked at the bills spread across the counter like accusatory fingers. Electric company threatening disconnection. Hospital bills from Sarah's final year that the insurance hadn't covered and never would. Credit card minimum payments that barely touched the principal. Interest compounding faster than hope could regenerate. Marcus Chen, former Marine who'd served 2 tours without flinching, felt his hands shake as he cracked eggs into the pan. Not from fear. From the exhausting algebra of keeping one step ahead of catastrophe while raising a daughter who deserved better than a father who cleaned other people's offices for barely enough to keep the lights on. 7 years ago, Sarah had lain in the hospital bed, chemotherapy having claimed her hair and most of her weight, but not the fierce intelligence in her eyes. Marcus sat beside her, holding the hand that had once been strong enough to corral 23 second graders and was now translucent as rice paper. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, marking time neither of them wanted to acknowledge. "You'll be okay. The doctor said there are still options." Sarah's smile held more sadness than 1,000 tears. "Marcus, you're a Marine. Marines don't lie to their own." We both know what the scans showed. She'd pointed to the digital recorder on the bedside table with effort that cost her breath. 50 stories so far. Bedtime reading for Lily until she's old enough to read them herself. Science lessons. Songs in Mandarin from my grandmother. Math tricks. Everything I won't be here to teach her. The words had broken something in Marcus's chest that 7 years hadn't repaired. Sarah had kept recording until 3 days before she died, her voice getting weaker but never losing the teaching cadence that had made her beloved by students and parents alike. The final recording was just breathing and whispered love, but Marcus played it sometimes when loneliness became a physical ache. "Education is the only thing nobody can take away," she'd said during one of their last real conversations. "Give our daughter the whole world, Marcus, through books if we can't afford anything else." He'd kept that promise. The apartment overflowed with volumes salvaged from library sales, thrift stores, sidewalk giveaways. Shelves built from reclaimed wood lined every wall, sagging under the weight of encyclopedias, language guides, science textbooks, children's literature in English, Mandarin, and now Arabic. Other single fathers bought their daughters toys. Marcus bought Lily keys to unlock doors he'd never been able to open himself. The eggs finished cooking. Marcus plated them, added the toast, poured orange juice from the container he'd watered down to make it last another 3 days. Sunday overtime meant bringing Lily along because Mrs. Rodriguez, who usually watched her, had caught the flu. It meant settling his daughter in a hallway with books while he cleaned executive bathrooms and emptied trash bins, invisible labor that kept the gleaming tower functioning while the people who worked there looked through him like he was made of glass. Lily emerged from her room rubbing sleep from her eyes, the unicorn pajamas Sarah had bought her nearly outgrown. She'd lost another tooth yesterday, the gap in her smile making her look even younger than 6. But her eyes held an ancient quality, the kind of awareness that came from absorbing loss too early and learning to find meaning in its wake. "Morning, Daddy. Morning, baby girl. Eat quick. We need to leave by 5:30. Are we going to the big building with the fancy floors?" Marcus nodded, guilt settling in his stomach like stones. Other kids spent Sunday mornings at playgrounds. His daughter spent them in office corridors, reading to stay quiet while he pushed industrial cleaning equipment through spaces designed to intimidate people exactly like him. But Lily never complained. She treated those Sunday mornings as adventures, exploring the building's public areas during his breaks, asking questions about the art in the lobby, the architectural details, the different languages she heard in the elevator. At 6 years old, she had already developed the habit of finding wonder in circumstances that would have broken many adults. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind that came from being each other's primary company, for 3 years. Marcus watched his daughter's careful bites, the way she chewed thoroughly like Sarah had taught her, and felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that defined his parenting. Lily was extraordinary. Teachers had confirmed it. Standardized tests had confirmed it. The school wanted to skip her ahead 3 grades, maybe more. But Marcus feared what acceleration might cost her. Childhood, friends her own age. The simple joy of being young without the weight of genius pressing down. The subway ride took 40 minutes. Lily pressed against his side with a book open in her lap. Not a children's book. A biography of Ibn Battuta, the medieval Arab traveler, which she'd found at the library and declared fascinating. She read aloud occasionally, translating passages from the Arabic text that Mrs. Amira had helped her source online. Other passengers glanced over, startled to hear classical Arabic from a blonde child in faded jeans, then looked away when Marcus met their eyes. New York specialized and studied indifference. Nobody asked questions they didn't want answered. 18 months ago, Lily had discovered an Arabic textbook at the Community Center Book Exchange. The flowing script had captivated her instantly. She brought it home with the reverence some children reserve for puppies or birthday presents, begging Marcus to help her learn the language of birds flying in formation, as she described the calligraphy. Marcus had stared at the book, helpless. He'd picked up some Arabic during his deployments, enough for basic commands and survival phrases. But teaching his daughter, he couldn't afford tutors, couldn't afford formal classes. Couldn't afford to disappoint her when she looked at him with Sarah's eyes and Sarah's hunger for knowledge burning behind them. Mrs. Amira Farsi had been the miracle he hadn't known to pray for. The retired Columbia professor lived in apartment 3C, a widow who'd lost her granddaughter Noor in a car accident 5 years prior. She'd heard Lily practicing pronunciation in the hallway one evening, the child's voice mangling vowels with determined enthusiasm. The old woman had stepped out, listened for a moment, then made an offer that Marcus initially refused out of pride and suspicion. "I'll teach her 3 times a week, no charge. I can't accept charity, ma'am." Mrs. Amira's eyes had held understanding rather than pity. "It's not charity, Mr. Chen. I need this as much as she does. I was a teacher for 40 years. Since Noor died, I've had nobody to pass knowledge to. Your daughter has a gift. Gifts wither without cultivation. Let me help them both grow." For 18 months, Lily had climbed to apartment 3C every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after school. Mrs. Amira taught her conversational Arabic, children's poetry, cultural context, the music of a language that connected 1 billion people across continents. The old woman didn't push technical vocabulary or business terminology. She taught Lily to hear the emotion beneath words, the respect encoded in formal greetings, the intimacy of colloquial expressions that textbooks never captured. Lily supplemented the lessons with YouTube videos, library audio recordings, online resources that the public library's computers made accessible. She practiced with the obsession of someone who'd found their calling, filling notebooks with vocabulary, reciting verb conjugations while brushing her teeth, dreaming in a language her mother had never spoken but would have loved her for learning. At 6 years old, Lily Chen could hold basic conversations in Arabic, read children's books, recite classical poetry, and understand the emotional nuance that made the difference between mechanical translation and true communication. She couldn't discuss quarterly earnings or fiscal projections, but she could hear sadness in a stranger's voice and respond with empathy in their mother tongue. The office building loomed 45 stories above Midtown, all glass and steel ambition. Marcus swiped his employee badge at the service entrance, leading Lily through corridors workers used, away from the marble lobbies where people like them weren't meant to be visible. His supervisor, Rodriguez, was already there setting up equipment. "Chen, good. Need you on floors 35 through 40, conference rooms especially. Some big meeting today. On Sunday? Rich people don't respect calendars like we do." Rodriguez handed him the master keys. "Your kid okay out here? She'll read. Won't bother anyone." Marcus settled Lily in the hallway outside the conference rooms, arranging her books around her like a fortress. She opened the astronomy text immediately, absorbed within seconds. He kissed the top of her head, breathed in the strawberry shampoo that was all they could afford, and started pushing his cleaning cart toward the bathrooms that needed his attention more than his daughter needed his supervision. For 2 hours, Marcus Chen made the 35th floor pristine. He scrubbed toilets, emptied trash, vacuumed carpets, wiped down conference tables, and polished glass until it disappeared. Invisible labor, essential labor, the kind that let other people focus on important things without considering who made their environment possible. Victoria Hayes had been in her office since 5 that morning, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than Marcus's annual salary. She'd reviewed the contract 40 times, memorized every clause, prepared for objections Hassan might raise. This deal represented her entire career compressed into one negotiation. Success meant validation. Failure meant Richard Walsh's smug satisfaction as the board reconsidered their decision to make her the youngest CEO in company history. The photograph of her father watched from the desk. Raymond Hayes, dead 5 years from a heart attack that had given no warning. He'd built this company from nothing, worked himself into an early grave, and told Victoria with his dying breath that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But she'd spent every day since trying to prove he was wrong. She needed to prove she'd earned her position through merit rather than grief-fueled board sympathy. She needed to prove she was more than her father's daughter. She needed to prove she deserved to breathe. Her phone buzzed. The translator. "Finally, Miss Hayes, I'm so sorry. Car accident on the FDR. Ambulance is here. I can't make the meeting." Victoria's hands went cold. "Are you hurt?" "Broken wrist. Possible concussion. I'm sorry, I tried. The call disconnected. Victoria immediately dialed 5 translation services. All closed, Sunday. Of course. Emergency services quoted 4-hour minimums for Arabic specialists, arrival time uncertain. The meeting started in 30 minutes. Hassan's flight back to Dubai left at 7. This was the window, the only window, and it was slamming shut. Her CFO, Sarah Martinez, knocked and entered without waiting. The translator? Accident. Can't come, delay the meeting. Hassan already delayed twice, once more and he'll walk completely. Victoria's voice cracked on the edge of panic she couldn't afford to show. We're in a city of 8 million people. How can we not find one Arabic speaker? Because the ones who aren't at mosque are with their families. Because it's Sunday. Because we're out of time and options. Victoria pressed her palms against the cool glass, watching traffic far below. Individual cars carrying individual people, each with their own languages and emergencies and impossible situations. Somewhere down there, someone spoke Arabic fluently and wasn't doing anything more important than this. But Manhattan specialized in keeping people in their proper places, languages in their proper circles. Desperation locked in soundproof rooms where it couldn't embarrass anyone. Sheikh Hassan arrived at 2 with 4 advisors, all wearing traditional kanduras that marked them as visitors to a country that had forgotten how to honor guests properly. Victoria greeted them with practiced warmth that masked screaming anxiety. They settled in the conference room she'd arranged according to cultural specifications: halal catering, Arabian coffee in imported cups, chairs positioned to face away from the setting sun per Hassan's preference. The contracts waited on the table like wedding invitations to a ceremony missing the bride. Hassan's eyes swept the room, noting the absent translator with an expression that shifted from neutral to cold. He spoke in Arabic, the words sounding like silk over gravel. His advisors translated among themselves with glances Victoria couldn't read, but understood perfectly. Disrespect, carelessness, American arrogance assuming English would somehow be enough. Sheikh Hassan, I apologize profusely. Our translator had an accident. I've called every service in the city. Hassan raised one hand, the gesture cutting her explanation like a blade through paper. More Arabic, his tone sharpening. One of the advisors leaned forward. The sheikh says trust is like glass. Once broken, it cannot be mended the same way. He came to America 3 times now. Each time something is missing, delayed, unprepared. He wonders if your company truly values this partnership or merely plays at international business. Victoria felt her career crumbling in real time. We do value it, more than I can express. Please give us 30 minutes. I'll find someone. Hassan spoke again, standing now. The advisors began gathering papers with practiced efficiency, the choreography of men who'd walked away from failed negotiations across 5 continents. The sheikh says some things cannot be solved with American optimism. Some moments reveal character. This moment shows him what he needed to know. His hand reached for the door handle. $40 million turning into 40 million regrets. $300 evaporating. Richard Walsh's voice already echoing in tomorrow's board meeting, suggesting perhaps a more experienced executive, someone who understood the gravity of international relations, someone male and 40 and willing to play golf with the old guard. Then Lily's voice, drifting through the door crack where she'd heard anger and recognized sadness and done what her mother's recordings had taught her to do. Help when you can, because helping is how angels earn their wings on earth. Assalamu alaikum ya Ammi al-Muhtaram. The Arabic syllables fell into the room's tension like stones into still water, ripples expanding to touch every surface. Hassan froze, his hand still on the door handle. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The advisors exchanged glances that would have been comedy if the situation wasn't balanced on a knife edge. Lily stood in the doorway, astronomy book tucked under one arm, looking at Sheikh Hassan with the kind of directness children possess before society taught them to be afraid of powerful people. She continued in Arabic, her young voice clear and careful, pronouncing each word with the precision Mrs. Amira had drilled into her for 18 months. I heard your words through the door. You sound sad, like my teacher when she misses her home in Lebanon. Forgive me for interrupting. My name is Lily. Hassan knelt slowly, his knees creaking slightly, bringing himself level with this impossible child who spoke his language better than most American university students. He responded in Arabic, wonder replacing anger in his expression. "And peace upon you, little one. Where did you learn to speak the language of poetry?" Lily switched to English briefly, glancing at Victoria and the advisors, then back to Arabic for Hassan's benefit. The code switching was effortless, the mark of someone who thought in multiple languages rather than translating between them. "Mrs. Amira teaches me. She's a professor. She lives in my building. We study 3 times every week for a year and a half. I also listen to recordings from the library and watch videos. The language sings to me, like music mixed with mathematics. Each word has a family, roots that connect to other words like a great tree." Marcus crashed through the door, his cleaning uniform marking him as definitively as a prison jumpsuit, his face cycling through embarrassment, fear, and protective instinct. The mop was still in his hand, forgotten. His daughter had just interrupted the kind of meeting he wasn't supposed to know existed, speaking to people whose entire net worth could buy his apartment building without noticing the expense. "Lily, I'm so sorry, everyone. We'll leave immediately. Please forgive." Hassan raised his hand again, but this time the gesture was gentle rather than dismissive. He stood, studying Marcus with eyes that had evaluated thousands of people across decades of business and knew how to recognize truth beneath circumstance. "This remarkable child is yours?" "Yes, sir. I apologize for the disruption. I'm just the janitor. We don't belong here. We'll go." The words tasted like ashes. Marcus heard himself diminishing his daughter's achievement, his own worth, reducing them both to their proper place in the hierarchy, but he didn't know what else to do. Rich people forgave intrusions from other rich people. They didn't forgive working-class violations of invisible boundaries. Hassan's expression shifted, something warming behind his formal demeanor. He turned to Victoria, who stood frozen in a moment that was either salvation or disaster, and wouldn't reveal which for several more seconds. "It seems God provides solutions in unexpected packages. If you're willing, Miss Hayes, I would like this young lady to help us continue our discussion. Sometimes the universe sends exactly what we need in forms we don't expect." Victoria looked at Marcus, really seeing him for perhaps the first time despite passing him in hallways for 7 years. Saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the cheap uniform, the calloused hands, the protective stance of a man who'd fight the world for his daughter despite having no weapons except love and determination. "Would that be all right with you, Miss Chen?" "Marcus Chen, Lily, honey, these are important people doing important work. We shouldn't interrupt." Lily tugged her father's sleeve with the gentle insistence of children who knew how to navigate their parents' fears. "Daddy, Miss Victoria needs help. Mama said we should always help when we can. She said that's how angels earn their wings on earth." The quotation landed in Marcus's chest like shrapnel. Sarah's words, from one of her final recordings, the lesson about kindness being more valuable than success, about helping others being the point of existence, about wings being earned through service rather than glory. He looked at Hassan, then Victoria, then his daughter's hopeful face. Every instinct screamed to remove them both from this situation. But Sarah whispered from beyond the grave that some opportunities were disguised as risks, and trust was the currency that bought tomorrow's possibilities. "Okay, if it's really all right with everyone. But Lily, you have to be respectful and professional. This is real business. I'll be good, Daddy, I promise." The negotiation resumed with a 6-year-old girl perched on a chair between Victoria Hayes and Sheikh Hassan al-Mansour, her legs swinging above the floor, her expression serious as she became the bridge between 2 languages and 2 worlds that had nearly failed to connect. Hassan spoke about investment timelines and Victoria responded with market analyses, and Lily translated with the kind of emotional intelligence that professional translators often lacked. When Hassan used a technical term, Lily would pause. "Uncle Hassan, what does fiscal quarter mean?" Hassan would explain in simpler Arabic. 3 months of business time. January through March, April through June, like seasons. Lily would nod, absorb the concept, then render it for Victoria with context that made the translation meaningful rather than mechanical. "He's asking about the seasons of your business. When do you measure if things are growing well?" The rhythm established itself. Hassan and Victoria learned to simplify their language, to speak in concepts rather than jargon, and discovered that clarity improved understanding for everyone involved. Lily didn't just translate words. She conveyed tone, captured the hesitation behind questions, the hope beneath caution. When Hassan made a joke about camels and venture capital that relied on Arabic wordplay, she giggled before translating, her genuine delight breaking the formality that had calcified between the two parties. She explained the pun to Victoria's team. In Arabic, the word for camel and patience come from the same root. He's saying Americans want camels that run like racehorses, but wise investment requires the camel's patient endurance across deserts. The room laughed, real laughter, the kind that dissolved walls and reminded everyone that business was ultimately about human beings trying to solve problems together. Hassan's advisors relaxed. Victoria's CFO stopped clutching her tablet like a shield. Marcus sat in the corner, forgotten by everyone except his daughter, who glanced at him every few minutes to confirm she was doing well, that he was proud, that this terrifying, wonderful moment was real. Victoria studied Marcus when his attention was on Lily, saw the pride in his expression despite the fear, saw the way he straightened every time Lily spoke, as if her words elevated him too, saw a man who'd somehow raised an extraordinary child while working jobs that ground other people into dust and resignation. How does she know these things? Victoria whispered during a brief pause while Hassan consulted his advisors. Marcus kept his voice equally low. She reads everything. Last week I found her with my old economics textbook from community college. Said it was interesting. She reads business sections of newspapers I bring home from recycling bins, medical journals from the hospital where I clean nights. She just absorbs it all like a sponge. You went to college? The question held no judgment, just curiosity. But Marcus felt the weight of truncated ambition anyway. Started community college, dropped out when my wife got pregnant. Needed money immediately, not degrees eventually. Victoria absorbed this information, her understanding of the man in the janitor's uniform shifting, expanding, complicating. She'd built her success on efficiency, on not wasting time seeing people who didn't directly contribute to her objectives. How many other Marcus Chens had she walked past? How many other Lilies were out there, brilliant and overlooked because their fathers cleaned offices instead of running them? As afternoon became evening, the fundamental agreement took shape. Hassan's demands were reasonable. Victoria's concessions were strategic. The deal that had seemed impossible 4 hours ago crystallized into something both parties could accept pending final legal review. Lily's translations had been more than accurate. They'd been bridges, carrying not just words but the intention and respect that made words meaningful. At 5 o'clock, with Manhattan's lights beginning to sparkle below, Hassan stood and extended his hand to Victoria. The handshake was firm, meaningful, the kind that sealed more than contracts. Then he surprised everyone by turning to Marcus, offering the same hand with the same respect. You have raised a remarkable daughter, Mr. Chen. In my culture, we say children are the flowers of paradise. Your flower blooms with exceptional beauty and rare fragrance. Marcus's eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall in front of strangers. Thank you, sir. She's all I have in this world. Her mother would be so proud of what she did today. Hassan's voice dropped, becoming gentle in a way that suggested personal understanding of loss. She is proud, Mr. Chen. Mothers watch over their children from paradise. This I believe with all my heart. Your wife's spirit lives in this child's remarkable mind. The words unlocked something in Marcus's chest that he'd kept carefully locked for 3 years. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and shook the billionaire's hand with the grip of a man who'd learned in the Marines that respect traveled through contact, that handshakes spoke louder than resumes. Victoria suggested dinner to celebrate the breakthrough, her executive instincts recognizing that deals sealed in conference rooms needed cementing in more relaxed environments. But Marcus hesitated, the old shame rising like bile. We should get home. We don't really fit in those kinds of places. Lily has homework for tomorrow. His daughter's homework was actually finished. She'd completed Monday's assignments on Friday afternoon. But the excuse gave him cover to retreat to familiar territory, to avoid restaurants where he wouldn't know which fork to use or how to tip without betraying his ignorance of expensive dining protocols. Hassan would not be deterred. Nonsense. You're part of this success. Both of you. This deal wouldn't have happened without Lily. To exclude you from the celebration would dishonor what she accomplished. Victoria added her voice to Hassan's. I insist, Marcus. Your daughter saved my career today. The least I can do is buy dinner. Lily tugged her father's hand, her eyes wide with the kind of hope that Marcus could never refuse, even when wisdom suggested otherwise. Please, Daddy, I've never been to a fancy restaurant. I promise I'll use good manners. The restaurant was elegant without being ostentatious, selected by Victoria for its private dining rooms that allowed comfortable conversation away from curious Manhattan eyes. Marcus sat stiffly at first, confronted by 3 forks, 4 glasses, and a menu without prices that made him feel like an imposter at his own daughter's triumph. But Hassan's easy manner helped him relax, the billionaire making a joke about American restaurants, complicating everything that desserts did simply. In Saudi Arabia, we eat with our hands, much more practical than all this. Hassan gestured at the excessive silverware with gentle mockery that included himself in the absurdity. Lily asked questions with the fearless curiosity that made her extraordinary. How do you build skyscrapers in sand? What's the mathematics of desert storms? How does Arabic poetry work differently than English? Hassan answered each question seriously, treating her 6-year-old intellect with the respect he'd show a colleague. And Marcus watched his daughter blossom under attention that recognized rather than patronized her gifts. Over the main course, after Lily had charmed everyone by explaining the difference between classical and colloquial Arabic pronunciation, Hassan turned to Marcus with a question that held more weight than its casual delivery suggested. Your daughter sees connections others miss. Has she been tested for giftedness? The school wanted to skip her ahead 3 grades, maybe more. Marcus paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. But I wanted her to have a normal childhood. Friends her own age. I don't want her to grow up too fast, to miss the simple joys of being young. Hassan nodded understanding, a father's concern, valid. But also consider that genius unused becomes frustration. Gifts require cultivation, not just protection. Victoria leaned forward, her CEO mask slipping to reveal genuine interest rather than strategic networking. It must be incredibly challenging, raising her alone while working multiple jobs. How do you manage? The question threatened to crack Marcus's carefully maintained composure. Pride warred with exhaustion, warred with the desperate need for someone to acknowledge how hard it was, how tired he was, how scared he was of failing the one person who mattered. We manage. Lily understands our situation. She's never complained, never asked for things I can't provide. She knows that every book I bring home is a treasure. Every library visit an adventure. Lily's voice cut through the adult conversation with the clarity of absolute truth. Daddy works harder than anyone in the whole world. He says money isn't wealth. Love is wealth. Time is wealth. Knowledge is wealth. We're very wealthy in all the ways that matter. The statement hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, elevating the conversation beyond transaction into something that felt dangerously close to communion. Victoria felt something crack in the armor she'd built around her heart, the efficient machinery that kept her focused on quarterly earnings and board approval. When had she last thought about wealth in terms other than dollars? Over dessert, while Lily practiced writing Hassan's name in Arabic calligraphy on her napkin, adding flourishes she'd learned from studying Islamic art books at the library, Victoria found herself watching Marcus help his daughter form a difficult letter. His hands, scarred from industrial cleaners and rough with work, moved with surprising gentleness. His eyes, tired but kind, lit up whenever Lily spoke. There was dignity in his bearing that transcended circumstance, a nobility that had nothing to do with bank accounts or job titles. Tell me about Lily's mother. Victoria asked the question softly while Lily showed Hassan her months of careful practice in the notebook she carried everywhere. Marcus's expression transformed, memories flickering across his features like old films projected on living skin. Maria was a teacher, elementary school, 2nd grade. She believed every child had a gift waiting to be discovered, a light waiting to shine. When she got sick, when we knew the cancer was winning, she spent her last months recording herself. Reading to Lily, teaching her to love learning. She made hundreds of recordings, bedtime stories, lessons about kindness, songs in Mandarin from her own childhood. His voice caught. She said knowledge would be Lily's inheritance, better than any money we could leave her. She said Lily would change the world one day. Victoria touched his hand briefly, surprised by her own boldness, by the urge to offer comfort to this man she'd passed in hallways for years without seeing. She sounds extraordinary. She was. Sometimes I see her in Lily's eyes. That same curiosity about everything. That same belief that the world is full of wonders waiting to be discovered. The same faith that goodness matters more than success. The conversation was interrupted by Hassan standing to leave, his advisors gathering their things with the practiced efficiency of men who traveled constantly and lived out of suitcases in hotel rooms. But before departing, Hassan made an offer that would ripple through their lives in ways none of them could predict. There's a cultural exhibition next Saturday at the Metropolitan Museum, Islamic Art and Science Through the Ages. I would be honored if you and Lily would attend as my personal guests. There will be scholars, artists, scientists, people Lily should meet, people who will recognize her gifts. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, aware of the social gulf such an invitation represented, the invisible walls between his world and Hassan's, that a single business meeting hadn't actually dissolved. That's very kind, but we wouldn't want to impose. Hassan's tone grew firm, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but choosing persuasion over command. Please, Mr. Chen, Lily has bridged two worlds today. Let me show her more of the world she's chosen to understand. And you, a father who raises such a child, is a man I want to know better. Perhaps we have more to learn from each other than this single afternoon has revealed. Victoria added her voice before Marcus could formulate another excuse. I'll be attending too. It would mean a lot to me if you came. Both of you. Lily looked up at her father with eyes that held all the hope in the universe. The kind of pure longing that parents couldn't refuse without crushing something essential in the architecture of their children's souls. Please, Daddy. Uncle Hassan says there will be astronomers showing how ancient Arabs mapped the stars. They'll have real astrolabes we can touch. Marcus Chen, former Marine who'd faced enemy fire without flinching, found himself utterly defeated by his 6-year-old daughter's enthusiasm. All right, we'll come. The agreement settled over them like a benediction, sealing something more significant than business contracts or cultural exchange invitations. Hassan embraced Marcus in the traditional way, kissing both cheeks, conferring a respect that crossed cultural boundaries and economic classes. Victoria shook his hand with warmth that surprised them both, her fingers lingering a moment longer than professional courtesy required. They parted on the sidewalk as Manhattan's evening energy swirled around them. Taxis honking, street vendors calling in a dozen languages. The city's endless symphony of ambition and survival playing its familiar score. Marcus held Lily's hand as they descended into the subway, his daughter chattering about everything she'd learned, everyone she'd met, the magic of an afternoon that had started with books in a hallway and ended with dinner at a table where she belonged. Victoria stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary, watching them disappear into the underground river of humanity that carried New York's working-class home after their labor made the city function. Something had shifted in her understanding of success, of value, of what actually mattered beneath the quarterly earnings and board approval she'd spent years chasing. A janitor and his 6-year-old daughter had saved her career. But more than that, they'd reminded her that people existed beneath job titles, that genius bloomed in unexpected soil, that the invisible labor holding the world together deserved the same respect as the visible achievements celebrated in boardrooms. She pulled out her phone and texted her assistant, "Research community outreach positions. Don't tell anyone yet. Just explore options." The response came immediately. "Is this about the Chen situation?" Victoria smiled at the screen. "This is about seeing people I should have noticed years ago." She walked toward her waiting car, the driver holding the door, ready to transport her back to the penthouse that cost more than Marcus earned in 5 years. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, the luxury felt hollow rather than earned. Success suddenly seemed less like reaching the top and more like understanding who you stepped on climbing there, who you failed to see, who you dismissed as irrelevant to your trajectory. Tomorrow the board would convene. Richard Walsh would attempt his usual subtle undermining. But Victoria had secured the Hassan deal through the most unlikely means imaginable, and that story would spread through corporate Manhattan faster than any publicity department could manage. The CEO who succeeded because she allowed a janitor's daughter to translate. The billion-dollar deal saved by a 6-year-old. The narrative practically wrote itself, and for once, Victoria didn't care about controlling the message. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them wonder what kind of leader valued results over credentials, people over protocol. In the subway, Lily fell asleep against Marcus's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional intensity of translating between worlds. Marcus held her carefully, breathing in the strawberry shampoo that was all they could afford, feeling her heartbeat against his ribs, alive and extraordinary and his. He'd woken at 4 that morning expecting another Sunday of invisible labor. He'd end it with his daughter having impressed a billionaire and a CEO, having proven that Sarah's faith in education as the great equalizer wasn't naive hope, but prophetic truth. The train rattled through darkness beneath the city, carrying them home to Queens, to the apartment filled with salvaged books, to the life they'd built from loss and determination and love that counted as wealth in every calculation that actually mattered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Bills would still need paying. Winter coats would still need buying. The mathematics of survival would reassert themselves with all their usual ruthlessness. But tonight, Marcus Chen allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe occasionally conspired to lift people up instead of grinding them down. That maybe Sarah was watching from somewhere beyond death's veil, proud of the daughter she'd helped shape, and the father who'd refused to let poverty limit their possibilities. That maybe wings really could be earned through helping others, and angels sometimes worked night shifts cleaning office buildings while raising genius daughters who spoke the language of poetry and bridged worlds that needed connection more than separation. Monday morning arrived with the particular optimism reserved for people who believed their luck had finally changed. Marcus swiped his employee badge at the service entrance, the same mechanical gesture he'd performed for 7 years. But today the building looked different, brighter somehow, as if Sunday's miracle had repainted the glass and steel in colors he'd never noticed before. His supervisor, Rodriguez, was already distributing assignments when Marcus reached the equipment room. "Chen, heard about yesterday. Helping with some big meeting?" My daughter translated. They needed someone who spoke Arabic. Rodriguez whistled low. "Didn't know your kid had that kind of talent. Building management's impressed. Keep doing whatever you're doing." The words settled into Marcus's chest like warmth after cold, the unfamiliar sensation of being acknowledged rather than invisible. Other janitors nodded as he passed, offering congratulations that felt surreal. For 7 years, he'd moved through these corridors like a ghost, noticed only when something wasn't cleaned properly. Now people saw him. Actually, they saw him. The recognition carried its own complicated weight. Validation mixed with the uncomfortable awareness that he'd only become visible because his daughter possessed value they recognized. Victoria reached her office before sunrise, the city still dark below her windows, and found herself unable to focus on the contracts requiring her attention. Her mind kept returning to Marcus Chen, the way he'd held his daughter's hand leaving the restaurant, the pride and fear mixing in his expression when Lily spoke. She'd passed him countless times in 7 years. How many others like him existed in the building? People with stories she'd never bothered learning, with children they were raising against impossible odds, with dreams they'd sacrificed so their kids could dream bigger. Her phone buzzed. Chairman James Park requesting a meeting at 9 to discuss the Hassan deal. Victoria prepared her presentation, rehearsing the narrative that positioned Sunday's success as strategic resourcefulness rather than desperate improvisation. But beneath the professional preparation, something uncomfortable gnawed at her conscience. She'd built her career on efficiency, on not wasting time with people who didn't directly advance her objectives. The realization that this had made her blind to humanity felt like discovering she'd been walking around with blurred vision for years, mistaking the distortion for clarity. Her assistant brought coffee at 7:30. "Victoria, I need to ask, are you seriously considering creating a community outreach position?" "Why would that be a problem?" "It's not a problem. It's just unusual. We've never had that kind of role before. Maybe that's exactly why we need it now." Victoria's voice carried an edge that surprised them both. Sometimes the things we've never done before are the things we should have been doing all along. Lily arrived at school Monday morning, carrying the secret of her Sunday triumph like a treasure too precious to risk breaking. But children couldn't keep secrets any better than adults could keep promises. By recess, word had spread. Her classmate Emma approached during free time, eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and confusion. My mom said you helped important business people. Is that true? I translated for them. They needed someone who spoke Arabic. You can really speak Arabic? Like actual Arabic? Lily demonstrated with a simple phrase, the words flowing easily. Emma's jaw dropped, followed quickly by demands that Lily teach her something cool to say. Other children gathered, transforming Lily's linguistic ability into playground currency. For a child who'd often felt isolated by the gap between her intellectual capacity and her chronological age, the attention felt like sunlight after months of shade. Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, pulled her aside after lunch. Lily, I heard about your weekend. That was quite an achievement. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I want you to remember something important. The teacher's voice carried the kind of wisdom that came from 3 decades of watching children navigate success and failure. Gifts are wonderful, but they're also responsibility. People will expect more from you now. Don't let that pressure steal your joy. The words were prophetic in ways Mrs. Patterson couldn't have predicted. Tuesday morning arrived not with opportunity, but with destruction. The kind that came from people who couldn't create, so they destroyed instead, who couldn't succeed, so they sabotaged others, who couldn't rise, so they dragged everyone down to their level. The blog post appeared at 8:15 on Manhattan Insider, a gossip site that specialized in corporate scandal, with the journalistic integrity of tabloid headlines and the fact-checking of conspiracy theorists. The article's author had done just enough research to make the lies plausible, just enough truth-twisting to create narrative momentum that facts couldn't easily counter. Janitor uses child to manipulate billionaire business deal, the dark side of corporate America. Marcus Chen, 35, works as a maintenance worker at a midtown office tower. But according to sources familiar with the situation, Chen has been running a sophisticated con for months. His target? Sheikh Hassan Al Mansour, the UAE billionaire known for investing heavily in American companies. The scheme came to fruition Sunday when Chen's daughter, 6-year-old Lily Chen, conveniently interrupted a crucial negotiation after the scheduled translator failed to appear. The girl allegedly speaks fluent Arabic, a claim sources question given her age and lack of formal education. Victoria Hayes, the embattled CEO of Hayes Global Solutions, who faces pressure from her board over lack of results, made the questionable decision to use an unqualified child as translator for a $40 million deal. Industry experts call this unprecedented and potentially disastrous. Chen's background raises further questions. Despite claiming poverty, he somehow afforded Arabic tutoring for his daughter. His late wife's family reportedly has connections to Chinese business interests, suggesting possible coordination with competitors. One source close to the situation spoke on condition of anonymity. This was clearly planned. The translator's absence wasn't coincidence. Chen positioned his daughter perfectly. He's been setting this up for months, using a child to exploit a billionaire's grief over his dead daughter. It's manipulation of the worst kind. Hayes Global Solutions declined comment. Sheikh Al Mansour's representatives could not be reached. The article metastasized across social media with the viral velocity of content that confirmed people's worst assumptions about human nature. LinkedIn professionals shared it with commentary about erosion of business ethics. Twitter turned it into a cautionary tale about corporate desperation. Facebook parenting groups debated whether using children in business contexts constituted exploitation regardless of circumstances. By 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, the story had 50,000 shares. By noon, it had doubled. News aggregators picked it up. Cable business channels mentioned it during market wrap-ups. The narrative hardened into accepted truth through repetition rather than verification. The modern alchemy that transforms speculation into fact by sheer volume of voices repeating the same lie. Marcus discovered the article when Rodriguez called him into the building manager's office at 2 that afternoon. Mr. Henderson sat behind a desk that had witnessed thousands of minor workplace dramas, his expression carrying the particular discomfort of someone forced to deliver consequences he didn't necessarily believe were deserved. Mr. Chen, I'm sure you've seen the article making rounds online. Marcus hadn't. He'd been cleaning the executive washrooms on floor 42, scrubbing toilets while his character was being assassinated in the court of public opinion. Henderson turned his computer screen around, and Marcus read the article twice. his hands starting to shake somewhere around the second paragraph. This is all lies. I didn't plan anything. Lily just heard someone upset and wanted to help. I didn't even know she'd learned that much Arabic. Henderson's sigh carried the weight of bureaucratic inevitability. I believe you, Chen. I do. But building management has protocols when an employee becomes involved in situations that generate this kind of attention. We need to suspend you pending investigation. With pay, it's just procedure. For how long depends on how long the investigation takes. Could be a few days, could be longer. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. He'd been suspended once before, years ago, when a different employer had blamed him for equipment that went missing on his watch. He'd been cleared eventually, but the gap in his work history had made finding his next job exponentially harder. Gaps raised questions. Questions led to assumptions. Assumptions became the resume nobody wanted to hire. I didn't do anything wrong. My daughter just wanted to help, I understand. But perception matters, unfortunately. Take the rest of the week off. We'll be in touch. Marcus left the building through the service entrance, the same route he'd used arriving that morning when the world had still held promise. The afternoon light seemed harsh now, exposing rather than illuminating. He pulled out his phone to call Mrs. Rodriguez, his usual babysitter, then remembered she was still sick. He'd need to pick Lily up from school himself, something he almost never did because his schedule didn't permit it. The school day ended at 3:15. Marcus waited outside with the other parents, most of whom were mothers in expensive athleisure wear who'd never worked a day in their lives and viewed school pickup as social opportunity rather than logistical necessity. They formed clusters, chatting about weekend plans and summer camps. Their conversations a foreign language of privilege Marcus had never learned to speak. Lily emerged with her backpack and the particular wariness children developed when they'd had a bad day, but hadn't yet decided whether to share it with adults. She saw Marcus and her face cycled through confusion, relief, and something that might have been dread. "Daddy, why are you here? Is everything okay?" "Let's go home, baby girl. We can talk there." They walked to the subway in silence, Lily's small hand in his larger one, both of them carrying burdens too heavy for the explanations available. On the train, Marcus finally spoke. "Did anything happen at school today? Anyone say anything mean to you?" Lily studied her shoes with the intensity of someone hoping answers might be written on the scuffed leather. "Some kids said their parents read something on the computer. About you using me, about us lying." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. "What did you say back?" "That it wasn't true. That you're the best daddy and we didn't lie about anything. But Emma said her mom said people like us always lie to get ahead." Her voice cracked on the last words, tears threatening to spill. Marcus pulled his daughter close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs. People like us. The phrase carried generations of prejudice compressed into 3 words. Poor people, immigrant people, people who cleaned toilets and lived in Queens and didn't belong in conference rooms with billionaires. "Listen to me, Lily. You didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people believe lies before they believe truth, especially when the lies confirm what they already think about people like us. But we know who we are. We know what really happened. That's what matters." But why would anyone write mean things if they weren't true? The question hung between them, a 6-year-old's reasonable expectation that adults operated with basic honesty, running headlong into the reality that adults were often worse than children at distinguishing truth from convenience. Marcus didn't have an answer that wouldn't either lie to his daughter or destroy something essential in her understanding of how the world worked. Back at their apartment, Marcus heated leftover rice and chicken, while Lily sat at the kitchen table pretending to do homework, but actually fighting tears. She'd experienced loss before. Her mother's death had taught her about grief's permanence. But this was different. This was being punished for helping, being attacked for using gifts she'd worked so hard to develop. The injustice of it burned hotter than sorrow. Marcus's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him accept the call. "Mr. Chen, this is Victoria Hayes." Her voice carried strain he hadn't heard Sunday, the CEO mask cracking enough to reveal actual human emotion underneath. Marcus's throat tightened. "Miss Hayes, I saw the article. I'm so sorry we caused you trouble. You didn't cause anything." Victoria's voice sharpened with something that might have been anger on his behalf. This article is garbage. Lies from beginning to end. I know that. Sheikh Hassan knows that. And I'm going to prove it to everyone else. I got suspended from work. People at Lily's school are saying things. Her voice broke on his daughter's name. I know. I'm handling it. I've hired a private investigator to trace the article's source. Someone wanted to sabotage the Hassan deal, and you got caught in the crossfire. This isn't about you, Marcus. It's about me, and I'm not letting you take the fall for my enemies. Why are you helping us? We're nobody to you. The question seemed to surprise Victoria into silence. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone articulating truth they just discovered. You're not nobody. You raised an extraordinary child while working 2 jobs and grieving a wife and surviving on hope and determination. That's somebody. That's more somebody than most people I know with Ivy League degrees and trust funds. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the phone pressed to his ear, and felt something crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. For 7 years, he'd moved through the world believing his value was measured in floors cleaned and trash removed. Having someone, especially someone like Victoria Hayes, suggest he mattered beyond his labor felt like learning a new language, one that described a world where dignity wasn't reserved for people with money and power. Wednesday morning brought the emergency board meeting Victoria had been dreading. She arrived prepared with data, with the signed letter of intent from Hassan, with projections showing how this deal would transform the company's position. But Richard Walsh had prepared too, and his ammunition was the narrative that had viral across corporate Manhattan. The conference room filled with board members whose combined net worth could have purchased a small country. James Parks sat at the head of the table, his expression neutral, but his eyes carrying concern. Walsh entered last, his smile suggesting a predator who'd finally cornered wounded prey. Victoria, congratulations on securing Sheikh Al Mansour's preliminary agreement. The word preliminary carried all the weight Walsh could pack into 5 syllables. Though I think we need to discuss the methodology that got us here. We used available resources creatively when faced with unexpected challenges. Victoria kept her voice level, professional. You used an unqualified 6-year-old child. Walsh spread printed copies of the blog post across the table like evidence at a trial. A child whose father may have orchestrated the entire situation. This reflects catastrophically poor judgment. Board member Sarah Kim leaned forward. Is there any truth to these allegations about Marcus Chen? None. Victoria's response was immediate and firm. I've had his background checked thoroughly. Honorable military discharge. His late wife was a beloved teacher. Perfect employment record. The insinuation that he somehow manipulated this situation is absurd. Walsh wasn't finished. But you can't deny you made an incredibly risky decision using untrained personnel for critical negotiations. What if Sheikh Al Mansour discovers the truth and withdraws? What if his translations were inaccurate? What if this entire deal collapses because you were more concerned with optics than competence? James Park spoke before Victoria could respond. Actually, I spoke with Sheikh Al Mansour's people yesterday. Wanted to verify his satisfaction with the proceedings. They confirmed the girl's translations were not only accurate, but demonstrated unusual cultural sensitivity. The Sheikh apparently intends to make a public statement supporting the Chen family. Walsh's expression flickered, confidence wavering for just a moment. Still, the perception damage is significant. Our competitors are already using this to question our professionalism. Some clients are asking whether we can be trusted with sensitive negotiations if this is how we operate. Then perhaps our communications team should be putting out accurate information instead of letting garbage blogs control the narrative. Victoria met Walsh's eyes directly, something shifting in her understanding of this man who'd undermined her since the day she became CEO. The vote was closer than it should have been, 5-3 in favor of proceeding with the Hassan deal pending final contract review, with stipulations about improved backup protocols for international negotiations. Victoria had won, technically, but the margins suggested Walsh's poison was working. That doubt had been planted in enough minds to make her position perpetually precarious. After the meeting, Victoria returned to her office and placed a call to the private investigator she'd hired Tuesday afternoon. Tom Brennan was ex-FBI, the kind of investigator who knew how to trace digital breadcrumbs through the labyrinth of modern information warfare. What did you find? Brennan's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd uncovered exactly what he'd suspected. The reporter who wrote the hit piece, Jake Morrison, does freelance work for Brighton Capital. They're the investment firm that wanted Sheikh Al Mansour's money and lost it when he chose you instead. So this is competitive sabotage. Gets better. Morrison's phone records show multiple calls to and from a number registered to Jennifer Walsh, Richard Walsh's executive assistant. She accessed your meeting notes 3 times Sunday evening, sent documents to her personal email, which she then forwarded to Morrison's burner account. Victoria's hands clenched around her phone. Walsh ordered this. Can't prove that directly, but I've got enough circumstantial evidence to make his life very uncomfortable. His assistant is willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity from legal consequences. She's got emails, texts, the whole paper trail. Walsh has been undermining you for months, feeding competitors information, trying to create situations where you'd fail. The revelation shouldn't have surprised her. Walsh had opposed her appointment from the beginning, making speeches about experience and qualifications that everyone understood meant age and gender. But having confirmation that a board member had actively sabotaged company interests to destroy her personally, that crossed lines Victoria hadn't believed even Walsh would violate. Send me everything. I need to talk to James Park before Walsh gets wind that we know. Already done. Park received his copy an hour ago. He's waiting for your call. The conversation with Park lasted 30 minutes. His initial skepticism giving way to cold fury as Victoria walked him through the evidence. By the end, they'd outlined a strategy that would either solidify her position or blow up spectacularly. Either way, silence was no longer an option. Thursday afternoon, Victoria called Marcus again. His voice when he answered carried the exhaustion of someone who'd stopped sleeping properly, who lay awake at night wondering how to explain to a 6-year-old why the world punished goodness. Marcus, I have proof the article was fabricated. Richard Walsh, one of my board members, orchestrated the leak. He wanted the Hassan deal to fail, and when it succeeded, he needed to destroy it from the inside. You and Lily were just convenient targets. Marcus absorbed this information in silence, the kind that suggested he was too tired for anger, too defeated for outrage. So we're collateral damage in corporate politics. Yes, and I'm sorry. This is my world's ugliness splashing onto you and your daughter, but I'm fixing it. Hassan wants to make a public statement supporting you at the museum event Saturday. Show everyone that the narrative in that article is lies. More people staring, more whispers, more judgment. Marcus's voice went flat. Maybe it's better if we just disappear. Let this blow over without making it worse. It won't blow over. Victoria's certainty cut through his resignation. Lies that go unchallenged become truth. You and Lily deserve to have your names cleared. You deserve to be recognized for helping rather than condemned for it. But I won't push if you're not willing. This is your choice. Marcus sat in his apartment looking at Lily doing homework at the kitchen table with the determined focus of a child trying to prove she was still good, despite what people said. Sarah's voice echoed from one of her recordings playing softly in the background, reading Charlotte's Web, with the warmth that had made her beloved by students. Let me think about it. Talk to Lily, of course. But Marcus? The people saying terrible things about you? They're wrong about everything. You're not a con artist or a manipulator. You're a father who raised an exceptional child under impossible circumstances. That's heroic, not criminal. After Victoria disconnected, Marcus sat with his phone in his hand, staring at the refrigerator covered in Lily's drawings. Heroes in the stories were soldiers and firefighters, people who saved lives in dramatic fashion. Nobody wrote stories about fathers who worked 2 jobs and scraped together rent money and filled apartments with library books. Nobody called that heroic, but maybe Victoria was right. Maybe heroism looked different than the movies suggested. Maybe it looked like showing up every day despite exhaustion, despite grief, despite a world that insisted you were invisible. Friday morning, Victoria's assistant knocked with news that Richard Walsh wanted to meet. He's in his office, says it's urgent. Victoria checked her watch. She'd been planning to confront Walsh on her own timeline, with Park present as witness. But perhaps Walsh's urgency meant he knew the walls were closing in. Sometimes predators made mistakes when they sensed the trap. Walsh's corner office occupied premium real estate on the 43rd floor, windows offering views that cost more per square foot than most Manhattan apartments. He sat behind his mahogany desk with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, who'd learned that money and connections could insulate against accountability. Victoria, we need to discuss your future with the company. She closed the door behind her, noting that his assistant's desk sat empty. Took the day off, Walsh had said, or been told to disappear while he handled dirty work. Victoria remained standing, refusing the chair that would put her at a psychological disadvantage. Actually, Richard, we need to discuss your betrayal. His expression flickered. Surprise, calculation, the rapid mental adjustment of someone recalibrating strategy mid-conversation. I don't know what you're talking about. Victoria placed the private investigator's report on his desk with the deliberate care of someone laying down evidence at a trial. Phone records connecting you to Brighton Capital through your assistant. Jennifer's testimony about accessing confidential files. Email trails showing you leaked information to competitors. Documentation of your months-long campaign to undermine me and sabotage company interests. Walsh's face drained of color, the cultivated tan suddenly looking like makeup over corpse-pale skin. This is ridiculous. Jennifer was acting independently. She's cooperating fully, trading everything she knows about your activities for immunity. Victoria's voice stayed level, professional, the tone she'd used discussing quarterly projections. Chairman Park has reviewed all evidence. The board will receive copies Monday morning unless you resign today. Walsh stood, his height and position behind the desk meant to intimidate, to reassert dominance through physical presence. You sanctimonious princess. You think you earned your position? The board gave it to you for diversity optics. Woman CEO makes good press. But you're playing in a world you don't understand, making decisions based on sentiment rather than strategy. Victoria met his anger with composure that only enraged him further. Say what you really mean, Richard. Say you can't stand that a 30-year-old woman is more successful than you. Say watching me succeed makes you feel like a failure. You're reckless, using unqualified civilians in critical negotiations, trusting a janitor's daughter over professional translators, making business decisions based on emotional impulses rather than data. You're everything wrong with modern corporate culture. Credentials over competence, feelings over facts. The accusations would have stung if Victoria hadn't spent the past days excavating her own assumptions about competence and credentials and what actually constituted value. But she'd seen Marcus Chen work 2 jobs while raising a genius daughter. She'd watched Lily demonstrate that brilliance had nothing to do with formal education. She'd learned that the metrics she'd used to measure worth for 30 years were fundamentally flawed. Lily Chen has more competence and emotional intelligence than you have in your entire body. Her father has more integrity in his calloused hands than you've shown in your entire career. And I'd rather make decisions based on recognizing human potential than whatever calculus tells you that sabotaging your own company is acceptable because a woman leads it. Walsh's expression twisted into something ugly. You've become sentimental. Weak, it'll destroy you. Maybe, Victoria picked up the report from his desk, but I'd rather be human than be you. You're resigning today, Richard. Personal reasons. Clean exit. Or Monday morning you're terminated with full disclosure of your sabotage. And I'll make sure every board you try to join hears about why you were fired. The ultimatum hung between them like drawn swords. Walsh had enough experience to know when he'd lost, when cutting losses was the only play remaining. His jaw worked, rage and humiliation warring behind eyes that had never learned how to accept defeat gracefully. Fine, I'll resign. But you'll regret this, Victoria. Compassion is weakness in business. You're setting yourself up for failure by caring about people who should stay invisible. If caring about people is weakness, I'll wear that weakness proudly. Now get out of my building. Walsh gathered his personal items with jerky, angry movements, shoving them into a box his assistant had likely prepared knowing this day would come. He left without another word, the door closing with finality that resonated through Victoria's chest. She'd just forced out a board member who'd been with a company since her father founded it. The power play would have consequences she couldn't fully predict, but she'd also stood up for Marcus Chen and his daughter when staying silent would have been easier. She'd chosen people over politics, and somehow, despite the professional risk, the decision felt more right than anything she'd done in years. Friday evening found Victoria in a diner in Queens, the first time she'd ventured to this neighborhood where people lived entire lives she'd never bothered learning about. The restaurant was clean but worn, Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, laminated menus advertising breakfast served all day. Marcus and Lily sat in a corner booth, both looking exhausted in ways that broke something in Victoria's heart. She slid into the booth across from them, noting how Lily pressed closer to her father, seeking protection from whatever new trauma the world might deliver. Victoria had ordered her assistant to find the best family lawyer in Manhattan, someone who could protect them if the situation escalated further. But first, she needed to give them the choice about Saturday. I have evidence proving the article was completely fabricated. Richard Walsh orchestrated the entire thing because he wanted me to fail. He's resigned. The truth will come out. But Hassan wants to make a public statement at the museum tomorrow, clearing your names definitively. It's your decision whether you want to attend. Marcus studied his coffee cup like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. More people will stare. More cameras. More judgment before the truth catches up. Lily spoke quietly, her voice smaller than Victoria had ever heard it. Will they stop saying mean things about Daddy? Yes. Hassan's statement will make it clear you both did nothing wrong. The media will have to correct their coverage. Your name will be cleared. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing fear mixed with hope in her expression. The same combination he saw in the mirror every morning. What do you think, baby girl? You want to go? Lily considered with the seriousness of someone whose 6 years had packed more loss and resilience than many people experienced in 60. Mrs. Amira says hiding from truth makes it grow bigger. She says facing hard things with brave hearts makes them smaller. Maybe we should be brave. Sarah's voice echoed in Marcus's memory from one of her final recordings. The world will try to make Lily small, Marcus. Don't let them. She was born to shine. Let her shine even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. His daughter was braver than he was. She'd walked into that conference room Sunday without hesitation, helped people who needed helping, and now faced consequences he should have protected her from, but couldn't. The least he could do was match her courage. Okay, we'll go. We'll face them together. Victoria reached across the table, squeezing Marcus's hand briefly, surprised by the warmth of the contact, by how much she wanted to offer comfort and how little experience she had doing so. You won't face them alone. Hassan and I will be there. The truth will be there. And after tomorrow, everyone will know what I already know, that you're a good father who raised an exceptional daughter, and anyone who says otherwise is a liar. The conviction in her voice surprised all three of them. Victoria Hayes, who'd built her career on emotional distance and professional boundaries, was making promises that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a janitor and his daughter who'd somehow cracked through defenses she'd spent decades constructing. They ordered dinner, pancakes for Lily, burgers for Marcus and Victoria, and for an hour pretended they were just three people sharing a meal rather than casualties preparing for battle. Lily asked Victoria about her childhood, whether she'd always wanted to be a CEO, what her favorite subject was in school. Victoria answered honestly, surprised by how long it had been since anyone had asked her questions unrelated to quarterly earnings or strategic planning. I wanted to be a teacher, actually, like your mom. But after my father died, I felt like I had to prove something into my bonus. Had to show I could run his company better than anyone else. Victoria paused, fork halfway to her mouth. I'm not sure anymore whether I became CEO because I wanted to or because I was afraid of wanting anything else. Mama said fear makes bad decisions. Lily's observation landed with the weight of wisdom beyond her years. She said love makes good decisions, even when they're hard. Your mama was very wise. Marcus watched Victoria's expression soften as she talked with Lily, the CEO mask slipping completely to reveal someone lonely and uncertain beneath the competence and control. He'd spent 7 years seeing her as untouchable, as existing in a different species of human from people like him. But grief was the universal language, and loss was the bridge that connected penthouse to Queen's apartment, corner office to janitor's closet. They parted on the sidewalk outside the diner, Victoria's car waiting to transport her back to a world of marble and glass, Marcus and Lily heading for the subway that would carry them underground toward home. But something had shifted in the geometry of their relationship. Some invisible wall dissolving to reveal that maybe, possibly, people from different worlds could see each other as human rather than function, as worth knowing rather than worth using. Saturday would bring confrontation and vindication, cameras and crowds, and the possibility of redemption or further destruction. But Friday night, walking home with Lily's hand in his, Marcus allowed himself to believe that Victoria Hayes genuinely cared what happened to them, that Sheikh Hassan's defense would carry weight, that truth might eventually outrun lies if given enough voices to amplify it. Lily fell asleep quickly that night, exhausted by a week that had taught her more about human cruelty and courage than 6 years of relative innocence had prepared her for. Marcus sat at the kitchen table after she'd gone to bed, listening to one of Sarah's recordings. Not for Lily this time, but for himself. His wife's voice reading poetry by Pablo Neruda, her favorite when she wanted to remember that beauty existed even in darkness. You would love what Lily did Sunday. The thought formed like prayer. She helped people who needed helping, spoke their language, built bridges. You always said she'd change the world. Maybe she already is, one translation at a time. The apartment was quiet except for Sarah's voice and the city sounds filtering through thin walls. Sirens, arguments, music from the neighbor's apartment, the symphony of lives packed together in buildings that warehouse dreams and struggles in equal measure. Marcus Chen had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had faced enemies with weapons designed to kill him. But nothing in combat had prepared him for the particular terror of being a single father in America, of raising a daughter extraordinary enough to attract attention and vulnerable enough to be destroyed by it. Tomorrow they would walk into the Metropolitan Museum, surrounded by people who judge them without knowing them, condemn them without hearing their side. Tomorrow Lily would face crowds that had called her father a con artist and her a tool of manipulation. Tomorrow the truth would either set them free or confirm that justice was reserved for people with resources to purchase it. But tonight, Marcus tucked his daughter in bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same words Sarah had whispered to her every night before cancer stole her voice. You are loved. You are brilliant. You are going to change the world. And no matter what anyone says, you are enough exactly as you are. In her penthouse across the city, Victoria stood at floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Manhattan's lights blur into constellations of ambition and survival. Somewhere out there, Marcus was putting Lily to bed in an apartment Victoria had never seen but could imagine. Small, crowded with books, filled with more love than her expensive space had ever contained. Tomorrow she would stand beside them publicly, stake her reputation on defending a janitor against a board member's sabotage, and either cement her position or destroy it completely. The decision should have felt reckless. Instead, it felt like the first entirely sane choice she'd made in years. Success that required stepping on decent people wasn't success worth having. Power that demanded cruelty wasn't power worth keeping. And if defending Marcus Chen and his daughter cost her the CEO position, maybe that revealed more about the company than about her judgment. She pulled out her phone and texted her mother for the first time in months. I met someone who reminded me that success and significance aren't the same thing. Wish you'd taught me that before Dad died. Wish I'd learned it sooner. Her mother's response came quickly. You can't learn some lessons until you're ready to hear them. I'm proud of you for learning it now. Victoria slept better Friday night than she had in months, her dreams untroubled by quarterly projections or board politics, filled instead with images of a 6-year-old girl who spoke the language of poetry and a father who'd raised her to believe helping others was how angels earn their wings. Tomorrow would bring judgment. But tonight, Victoria Hayes allowed herself to believe she'd finally chosen the right side of a battle that mattered more than profit margins. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched Marcus's mood as he pressed his single good suit, the one purchased secondhand for Sarah's funeral 4 years ago, worn twice since for job interviews that hadn't panned out. The fabric held creases that wouldn't quite flatten no matter how long he held the iron, the shoulders slightly too broad from when he'd weighed more muscle and less worry. He polished Lily's school shoes until they reflected light, the patent leather concealing scuffs that told stories of playground adventures and library steps. Lily emerged from her room wearing the blue dress that had been her favorite since the color reminded her of summer sky, the fabric worn soft from washings but still presentable if nobody looked too close. Sarah's quinceañera bracelet, thin gold with a tiny cross, circled her small wrist, the one piece of jewelry they'd kept when selling everything else to pay medical bills. She touched it frequently, a talisman connecting her to a mother whose face was fading from memory, but whose voice remained vivid through hundreds of recordings. "Do I look okay, Daddy?" Marcus knelt to her height, adjusting the collar that sat crooked despite her best efforts. "You look beautiful. Mama would be so proud. Will people still say mean things?" The question deserved honesty rather than comfort. Maybe some will, but Uncle Hassan and Miss Victoria will tell the truth, and we'll hold our heads high because we know who we are. The subway ride to the Upper East Side took 45 minutes through neighborhoods that shifted from working-class survival to casual affluence block by block. Marcus watched the transformation through windows streaked with rain, bodegas giving way to boutiques, chain-link fences replaced by wrought iron, people's clothing becoming more expensive as buildings grew taller and cleaner. Lily pressed against his side, alternating between reading Arabic poetry from the notebook Mrs. Amira had given her and watching raindrops race down glass. The Metropolitan Museum rose from Fifth Avenue like a temple to culture and wealth, its limestone steps slick with October rain, banners advertising the Islamic art exhibition fluttering in wind that carried the smell of wet leaves and approaching winter. People climbed those steps in groups that spoke the language of privilege, cashmere, and confidence. Weekend plans that included charity galas and summer homes, conversations about recent trips to Dubai or Marrakesh delivered with the casual entitlement of those who'd never questioned their right to consume the world. Marcus felt every thread of his cheap suit, every scuff on Lily's shoes, every way they didn't belong in this gathering of Manhattan's elite who summered in the Hamptons and knew which fork to use without having to watch other people first. His hand tightened on Lily's as they climbed steps that seemed designed to separate those who belonged from those who were visiting. Victoria waited inside the entrance, her tailored suit and pearl earrings marking her as native to this world, but her expression carrying something new, a wariness that suggested she was seeing the space through Marcus's eyes rather than her own. She'd arrived early, watching the crowd gather, listening to conversations that casually referenced net worth and private schools and vacation properties, and feeling for the first time the weight of unexamined privilege that separated her world from the one where Marcus raised his daughter. "You came." Relief colored her greeting as she spotted them entering. "We said we would." Marcus's voice carried the steady determination of someone who'd learned in the Marines that showing up was half of courage. Hassan stood near the Islamic Art Wing entrance with Mrs. Amira Farsi, the elderly professor leaning on a cane, but eyes bright with protective fierceness as she watched her prize student navigate a gauntlet of strangers who'd condemned her without knowing her. Hassan wore traditional kandura beneath an expensive overcoat, the combination of cultural pride and Western accommodation that marked him as comfortable straddling worlds that others found mutually exclusive. The stares began immediately. Whispered conversations behind manicured hands, phones discreetly angled to capture photos, the particular energy of people witnessing scandal in real time. Some looks carried sympathy. These were the ones who'd read follow-up articles questioning the original story's veracity. But others held judgment, the crystallized certainty of those who'd decided truth based on headlines and weren't interested in revision. Marcus felt Lily's hand tremble in his. The instinct to protect his daughter by fleeing nearly overwhelmed every other consideration. But Hassan approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to owning whatever space he occupied, kneeling to Lily's height despite the expensive fabric touching marble floor. "Assalamu alaikum ya saghirati ash-shajara." "Peace upon you, my brave little one." Lily's response came automatically, 18 months of Mrs. Amira's training overriding nervousness. "Are you ready for an adventure?" The exhibits are full of wonders, astrolabes and manuscripts and mathematical innovations that change the world. Mrs. Amira placed a weathered hand on Lily's shoulder. "I've been telling Hassan about your calligraphy practice. He wants to see your notebook." The request gave Lily focus beyond the whispers, pulling her Arabic notebook from her small backpack with the pride of someone sharing work they'd labored over. Hassan examined each page with the attention of someone who understood that a child's careful practice represented more than pretty letters. It represented discipline, passion, commitment to understanding culture through its written beauty. "This is extraordinary work. Your formations are more precise than many university students I've encountered. Mrs. Amira is an excellent teacher, but the student must have the heart for learning. You have that heart." The praise settled into Lily like warmth after cold, reminding her that some voices mattered more than the crowd's judgment. They moved into the exhibition space, the four adults forming a protective square around one small girl who'd become the center of a controversy she'd never sought. The exhibition sprawled across galleries displaying Islamic contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, architecture, art, centuries of innovation presented through artifacts that prove civilization's debt to cultures often dismissed or demonized by people who'd never bothered learning history. Hassan guided them through displays, explaining the astrolabe's mechanical genius, the elegance of Arabic calligraphy as both art and mathematics, the way Islamic scholars had preserved Greek philosophy when Europe descended into intellectual darkness. Lily absorbed everything with the hunger that made her extraordinary, asking questions that demonstrated comprehension beyond her years, but phrased with six-year-old directness. If they invented algebra, why didn't they call it Arabic instead of algebra? Hassan laughed, the sound genuine and warm. They did. Al-Jabr means completion or restoration in Arabic. Europeans borrowed the word along with the mathematics. So we're all using Arabic when we do math homework and don't even know it. Exactly. Language and knowledge flow between cultures like water finding level. Borders don't contain ideas. Marcus watched his daughter engage with material he barely understood, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and inadequacy that defined his parenting. He'd given her books and library access and Mrs. Amira's mentorship. But Lily's brilliance came from somewhere beyond his providing, some alchemy of genetics and determination, and Sarah's final gift of recording herself so their daughter would never lack for a mother's voice, teaching her that learning was the inheritance that mattered. A distinguished older man approached their group, his Columbia University faculty badge visible beneath his coat. Mrs. Amira's face lit with recognition that transcended the years since they'd last spoken. "Amira, I heard you were here, and this must be the student you have been teaching." "Professor David Kim, may I present Lily Chen?" "Lily, Professor Kim was my colleague for 20 years before we both retired." Kim knelt to examine Lily's notebook, his expert eye catching nuances that untrained observers would miss. "Your Hamza formations are excellent, and you're using diacritical marks correctly, something many students skip because they're challenging. Mrs. Amira makes me practice them. She says they're important for proper pronunciation." "Your teacher is correct." Kim straightened, addressing Marcus directly. "Sir, if Amira Farsi is teaching your daughter, you should know she only accepts students she believes will change the world. She turned down 3 endowed professorships because the institutions didn't meet her standards. If she's invested in your daughter's education, that's validation worth more than any standardized test." The words landed in Marcus's chest like unexpected gifts, confirmation from sources beyond his ability to provide that maybe, possibly, he was doing right by his daughter despite working 2 jobs and living in a too small apartment and sometimes feeding her cereal for dinner when exhaustion made cooking impossible. More scholars gathered as word spread that Amira Farsi had emerged from retirement to teach again. They treated Lily with the respect accorded to promising minds rather than curiosity reserved for anomalies, asking about her studies, her favorite aspects of Arabic, whether she'd considered learning other Semitic languages given her evident aptitude. Lily answered each question with growing confidence, the crowd's earlier judgment fading as academic validation replaced tabloid scandal. The exhibition's curator approached Hassan with news that the scheduled speaker had fallen ill with food poisoning, asking if the sheikh might say a few words about the artifact's cultural significance. Hassan agreed with the condition that surprised everyone except those who'd witnessed his Sunday decision to trust a 6-year-old translator. "I'll speak, but only if young Lily Chen joins me. She understands something about Arabic culture that many scholars miss. Its heart, its living breath, the way it connects past to present through language and art." The murmur through the crowd was immediate and electric. Some recognized Lily's name from the scandal articles, others from follow-up coverage questioning the original story's accuracy. All recognized that Hassan was making a statement beyond mere words. He was staking his reputation on defending this child publicly. Marcus wanted to object, to protect Lily from harsh spotlight and judgment she didn't deserve. But his daughter looked up at him with Sarah's eyes and Sarah's courage burning behind them, and he remembered his wife's final recording about not letting fear make their decisions. "Daddy, Mama said we shouldn't hide our light. She said that's fear talking, not wisdom. The quotation broke something in Marcus's resistance. Sarah had recorded those words 3 weeks before dying, her voice already weak but still fierce with conviction, that their daughter would need courage more than comfort, that the world would try to diminish her, and Marcus's job was ensuring Lily knew she deserved space and voice and recognition. Okay, baby girl, if you're brave enough, I'm brave enough. Victoria touched his shoulder briefly, the gesture conveying solidarity that transcended their class difference. Let her fly. Hassan and I will make sure she's safe. The presentation space filled rapidly, word spreading through the museum that something significant was happening in the Islamic art wing. Camera phones appeared, people positioning themselves for optimal recording angles, the energy shifting from casual Saturday museum visit to event worth documenting. Marcus stood at the back beside Victoria and Mrs. Amira, his heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too tight to contain the fear and pride warring inside his chest. Hassan took the microphone first, speaking about the golden age of Islamic science, about poets and mathematicians who saw no division between art and arithmetic, between faith and reason, about a civilization that had valued knowledge when much of the world valued only conquest. His voice carried authority earned through decades of business success and cultural pride that had survived despite Western attempts to reduce Islam to stereotypes and threats. Then he gestured to Lily, and she stepped forward with the unconscious confidence of children who hadn't yet learned to doubt themselves. The microphone had to be lowered significantly, the technical adjustment creating a moment of levity that reminded everyone how young she was, how remarkable that someone so small was commanding this stage. Lily spoke first in Arabic, her young voice clear and precise, each word formed with the care Mrs. Amira had drilled into her through 18 months of patient instruction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of the compassionate, the merciful, the traditional Islamic opening performed with respect that transcended her youth. She switched to English, her words carefully chosen, but delivered with 6-year-old honesty rather than rehearsed performance. Hello, my name is Lily Chen. I'm 6 years old. I learned Arabic from Mrs. Amira in library books. I've been studying for a year and a half. Sometimes I still make mistakes. Mrs. Amira has to correct me a lot. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd, the admission of imperfection making her more relatable rather than less impressive. Some people said my daddy taught me Arabic to trick people. But my daddy is the most honest person I know. He wakes up at 4 in the morning every day. He works so I can have books. Every night he asks what I learned. Every morning he makes sure I eat breakfast. When I'm scared, he hugs me. When I'm happy, he's happy too. Her voice caught slightly, emotion threatening composure, but she breathed through it the way Mrs. Amira had taught her to breathe through difficult pronunciation. My mama died when I was 3. She was sick for a long time. But before she went to heaven, she recorded lots of stories and lessons. She taught me that learning is how we become bigger than our circumstances. She said knowledge is the one thing nobody can take away, even when they take everything else. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, unconcerned about who witnessed his breakdown, because his daughter was speaking truth that mattered more than pride. I learned Arabic because I like it. The letters look like birds in formation. The sounds remind me of music and mathematics together. Mrs. Amira says every language is a gift from one people to another people. When I speak Arabic, I'm saying thank you for that gift. When I heard Uncle Hassan talking last Sunday, I knew he was sad. I didn't think about business meetings or important deals. I just thought maybe I could help. My mama always said helping people is how we show love in action. The phrase was directly from one of Sarah's recordings, and hearing it emerge from Lily's mouth in front of hundreds of strangers felt like his wife was present, speaking through their daughter, validating every exhausting choice Marcus had made in the 3 years since cancer had stolen her. I don't understand why people are angry at my daddy. He didn't do anything wrong. He just raised me to be brave and kind. Isn't that what parents are supposed to do? The question hung in the air, unanswerable because its simplicity revealed the complexity of adult judgment. How quickly people assign malice to actions that could be explained by love. Lily's voice strengthened as she approached her conclusion, 6-year-old certainty replacing nervousness. My daddy works very, very hard. He cleans buildings so they're safe and beautiful for everyone. That's important work. Without people like my daddy, the fancy buildings couldn't work properly. Without janitors and security guards and delivery people, none of the important business stuff happens. Maybe we should say thank you to people like my daddy more often. Maybe we should notice them instead of looking through them like they're invisible, because they see us. They make sure we're comfortable and safe while we do our big important things. The final passage in Arabic flowed with the poetry Mrs. Amir had helped her select, followed immediately by English translation. Ash-shajara tarif min thamarha. A tree is known by its fruit. Uncle Hassan taught me that saying, look at the fruit of my daddy's work. She gestured to herself with unconscious grace. That's me, and I think he did a really, really good job. Lily walked back to Marcus with the same calm purposefulness she'd used approaching the microphone, as if she hadn't just challenged an entire room of powerful people to examine their prejudices and assumptions. She took her father's hand naturally, without drama, and looked up at him for confirmation she'd done well. Marcus couldn't speak past the emotion blocking his throat, could only kneel and pull his daughter into an embrace that said everything words couldn't manage. Behind him, he heard the applause beginning, tentative at first, then building into something that felt like thunder rolling through marble halls. The standing ovation started with Professor Kim, respect from one scholar to another, regardless of age. Then a UN diplomat stood, her applause deliberate and measured. More joined, the sound building until hundreds of people were on their feet, some wiping tears, others simply acknowledging that they'd witnessed something rare and true. A child speaking truth to power without knowing that's what she was doing. Hassan returned to the microphone, his voice thick with emotion that years of business negotiations had never quite managed to provoke. This child speaks wisdom we adults often forget. I came to America angry about missing translators, ready to abandon years of negotiation. I leave grateful for finding something more valuable than any business deal. A reminder that wisdom recognizes no age, no economic class, no single language or culture. His tone shifted, hardening into something that carried weight beyond personal opinion. Let me be absolutely clear about Marcus Chen and his daughter. The article published this week was not merely inaccurate, it was malicious fabrication designed to destroy innocent people for corporate and political purposes. I know this because my own investigators traced its source. The lies have been exposed. The perpetrators will face consequences. I have met presidents and princes, CEOs, and celebrities across 5 continents. Few have impressed me with their integrity the way Marcus Chen has. A man who works 2 jobs to fill his daughter's world with knowledge rather than purchasing his own comfort, who honors his late wife's memory by keeping her dreams alive through their extraordinary child. Anyone who continues spreading false narratives about this family will answer to legal action. I am fully prepared to fund and pursue. This is not a threat. This is a promise from someone who values honor above profit and will not tolerate injustice against people whose only crime was helping when help was needed. The statement landed with the force of hammer on anvil, photographed and recorded by dozens of phones that would spread Hassan's defense across the same social media networks that had condemned Marcus and Lily days earlier. The narrative was shifting in real time, truth finally catching up to lies, though the damage inflicted couldn't be entirely undone. Hassan continued, his next words creating ripples that would extend far beyond this moment. The contract with Hayes Global Solutions will include a provision I'm adding personally, a scholarship fund for children like Lily, whose minds hunger for knowledge, but whose circumstances limit access. It will be called the Sarah Chen Memorial Foundation for Language Studies, honoring the teacher who understood that education is the inheritance that truly matters. Marcus's knees nearly buckled. Sarah's name, Sarah's dream, Sarah's belief in education as liberation transformed into something permanent and real through a billionaire's generosity. His wife would exist beyond memory, beyond recordings, beyond the 2 short years she'd lived. She would exist in opportunities extended to other children, other families fighting similar battles against poverty and limitation. Victoria stepped forward, her CEO presence commanding attention, but her voice carrying warmth that professional distance usually prohibited. I want to add something to Sheikh Hassan's generous contribution. Effective Monday, Marcus Chen will be offered the position of Community Outreach Director at Hayes Global Solutions. We need someone who understands real work, real struggle, real dignity in all its forms. Someone who can help us build bridges, not just with international partners, but with the communities we claim to serve. Her eyes found Marcus in the crowd, holding his gaze with intensity that transcended professional courtesy. This isn't charity or sympathy. This is recognition that we've been blind to talent in our own building. How many other remarkable people do we overlook because they clean offices instead of occupying them? How many other children like Lily are brilliant but invisible because their parents' job titles don't open doors? This position is about correcting that blindness. Marcus started to protest. I don't have a degree. I don't know corporate culture. I don't belong in that world. But Victoria's expression stopped him. You know about people, Marcus, about maintaining dignity when circumstances try to strip it away, about raising hope in situations designed to destroy it. That knowledge is more valuable than any MBA. The corporate stuff can be taught. The character you've demonstrated can't be. Hassan added his voice to Victoria's. Accept this, my friend. Consider it not as favor, but as appropriate recognition for value you already possess. Your insights into working families, into community needs, into the gap between corporate promises and actual impact. These are precisely what her company requires. The crowd's energy shifted again, from judgment to celebration, from scandal to validation. People approached Marcus afterward, apologizing for believing the article, praising his daughter, offering support that felt genuine, even if motivated partly by social performance. Some conversations would lead to real connections. Others would evaporate once cameras stopped recording. But in the moment, surrounded by people treating him as worthy of their attention, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe Sunday's miracle hadn't been temporary. Mrs. Amira stood beside Lily, one weathered hand on her student's shoulder, tears streaming down a face that had seen too much loss but had found purpose again through teaching this remarkable child. She'd lost her granddaughter Noor 5 years ago, the grief creating a void that nothing could fill until a small voice in her hallway began murdering Arabic pronunciation with such determined enthusiasm that refusing to help had been impossible. You did beautifully, Habibti. Your Arabic was perfect, your message was true, and you honored your mother's memory with grace beyond your years. Lily hugged her teacher with the fierce affection of someone who understood that Mrs. Amira had given her more than language lessons. She'd given her keys to unlock doors, wings to fly across borders, bridges to connect worlds that seemed separate but were fundamentally linked by shared humanity. The reception following Hassan's presentation filled the museum's Great Hall with people who wanted to congratulate, apologize, network, or simply be part of the story they could later tell about the 6-year-old who challenged Manhattan's elite. Marcus accepted handshakes and business cards from people whose names he immediately forgot, overwhelmed by attention after 7 years of invisibility. Victoria stayed close, running interference when conversations grew too intense, steering him toward people who might actually help versus those performing compassion for social media documentation. She'd spent her career reading people, distinguishing genuine interest from strategic positioning, and used that skill now to protect Marcus from being consumed by a crowd that had condemned him Wednesday and celebrated him Saturday without recognizing the contradiction. Professor Kim approached with several Columbia faculty members, their interest in Lily academic rather than social. We'd like to discuss opportunities for her continued education. Columbia has programs for gifted students that might benefit her development. Marcus felt a familiar fear spike in his chest. She's 6. She needs to be 6. Friends her own age, playground time, childhood before everything gets complicated and serious. Kim nodded understanding. Of course. But consider this. Genius unused becomes frustration. Gifts require cultivation, not just protection. We're not suggesting acceleration that isolates her, rather supplemental programming that challenges her mind while allowing social development at age-appropriate pace. Mrs. Amira added her voice. I can ensure any program respects Lily's childhood while nurturing her abilities. I may be retired, but Columbia still listens when I make recommendations. Your daughter's gift is rare, Marcus. She deserves resources that match her potential. The conversation continued, plans forming that would shape Lily's future in ways Marcus couldn't fully predict, but was learning to trust. His instinct was protecting her from everything that might hurt or overwhelm. But maybe protection looked different than hiding. Maybe it looked like providing opportunities while maintaining boundaries, challenging her mind while preserving her joy, letting her fly while ensuring she had safe places to land. Evening approached, the museum preparing to close, and Hassan extended one final invitation. Dinner, a small group, just us, no cameras, no performance, simply friends sharing a meal and conversation. The restaurant Hassan selected was elegant without ostentation, a private room allowing comfortable conversation away from curious observers. Marcus sat more comfortably than he had the previous Sunday, the week's trials having burned away some of his self-consciousness about not knowing which fork matched which course. Lily was exhausted but happy, curled against his side, occasionally contributing to conversation, but mostly content to listen while adults talked. Hassan spoke about his daughter Fatima, sharing memories he rarely voiced because grief had calcified around them until today's events had cracked something open. She would have been 16. Brilliant like Lily, curious about everything, determined to use education as tool for changing the world. Leukemia took her before she could fulfill that promise. His eyes glistened with tears that dignity no longer required him to hide. Helping Lily, establishing the scholarship in Sarah's name, these feel like honoring Fatima's memory by ensuring other bright children don't have their light extinguished by circumstances. Perhaps God arranges meetings between people who need each other in ways they don't immediately recognize. Mrs. Amira shared her own loss. Her granddaughter Noor killed by a drunk driver at age 7. I stopped teaching after that, couldn't bear seeing children who reminded me of what I'd lost. Then I heard Lily practicing Arabic in the hallway, butchering pronunciation with such earnest determination that I had to help. Teaching her healed something I thought was permanently broken. Victoria contributed her story too, her father's sudden death when she was 25, how she'd thrown herself into work to avoid feeling the loss, how that had made her successful but hollow. Meeting you both, she gestured toward Marcus and Lily, reminded me that people matter more than profit, that success without humanity is just expensive loneliness. The conversation wove their losses together into something resembling hope. 4 adults who'd survived different tragedies, finding connection through one remarkable child who embodied possibility rather than limitation. They weren't replacing what they'd lost, but they were building something new from the broken pieces, creating family from choice rather than obligation. Marcus shared the hardest parts he usually kept hidden, the nights he couldn't sleep because fear about money paralyzed him, the times he'd fed Lily cereal for dinner 3 days running because exhaustion made cooking impossible, the persistent shame of not providing better despite working himself to exhaustion. Sarah would have hated seeing him struggle like this, but she also would have been proud he'd kept going, kept Lily surrounded by books and love, if not material comfort. Your wife knew what mattered. Hassan's voice carried conviction. Rich men like me can buy comfort for our children, but sometimes fail to give them character. You gave Lily something more valuable than wealth. You gave her integrity, compassion, understanding that helping others matters more than personal advancement. Those lessons can't be purchased. The meal concluded with Hassan insisting on covering the check despite Marcus's protest. You'll have salary Monday to pay for future dinners. Tonight, let me honor the man who helped save a deal I'd almost abandoned to pride and frustration. They parted on the sidewalk as October darkness settled over Manhattan, the city's lights creating artificial constellations that replaced stars obscured by buildings and pollution. Hassan embraced Marcus in the traditional way, conferring respect that transcended their economic difference. Mrs. Amira kissed Lily's forehead, her student transformed into something approximating the granddaughter she'd lost. Victoria shook Marcus's hand with warmth that suggested friendship developing beneath professional relationship. See you Monday morning, Community Outreach Director. Don't be late. The title still felt impossible, like costume Marcus was trying on without quite believing it fit. But Victoria's smile suggested she saw something in him worth cultivating, worth trusting with responsibilities beyond pushing mops and emptying trash. 3 months later, November rain pelted Central Park's naked trees, the landscape stripped to essential architecture, beauty residing in bone structure rather than ornamentation. Marcus pushed Lily on the swings, her laughter cutting through gray afternoon, joy uncomplicated by the adult anxieties that had dominated recent months. His new position had proven challenging in ways no amount of determination could entirely smooth. He'd entered meetings where acronyms flew like weapons he didn't know how to catch, navigated corporate politics that made military strategies seem straightforward, learned software programs that refused to function despite following instructions precisely. But Chairman Park had proven patient, Victoria had provided mentorship, and Marcus's insights into working families' actual needs had led to 3 new initiatives the board praised as innovative and essential. The scholarship program for service workers' children had launched with 15 recipients, Lily's story featuring prominently in promotional materials that Marcus had reluctantly approved after Victoria convinced him that visibility served purpose beyond exploitation. The career development track for maintenance staff had created pathways for janitors and security guards to transition into other roles if desired. The community college partnership offered continuing education support for employees who'd started degrees but never finished. Marcus was building what Sarah had dreamed: ladders for people to climb, opportunities that recognized potential rather than credentials, bridges across gaps that seemed designed to be permanent. The work exhausted him differently than physical labor had, mental fatigue replacing bodily aches. But the satisfaction ran deeper. He was helping people, changing systems, making the kind of difference Sarah had believed possible when she recorded those final lessons about knowledge being the inheritance that mattered. Victoria arrived at the park carrying coffee for Marcus and hot chocolate for Lily. Her weekend casual clothes a contrast to the suits that defined her weekday presence. She'd been spending more time in Queens lately, joining them for Saturday library trips and Sunday dinners, learning Marcus's world with the humility of someone who'd realized her previous understanding had been limited by privilege she'd never examined. Their relationship was developing slowly, built on friendship before romance, respect before passion. Neither rushed toward anything that might complicate the stability Marcus was building for Lily. But something was growing between them, connection that felt more real than Victoria's previous relationships with men who'd valued her for CEO status rather than actual personality. Lily jumped from the swing mid-arc, landing with 6-year-old certainty that gravity would cooperate. She ran to Victoria for the promised hot chocolate, then settled on a bench between the 2 adults who'd become her expanded family. Uncle Hassan called this morning. He's visiting next week and wants to take me to the planetarium. Lily had maintained regular contact with Hassan through video calls, their conversations mixing Arabic practice with discussions about science and culture, and the questions 6-year-olds asked when they weren't afraid of looking ignorant. Hassan had become the grandfather figure Lily had never known, filling a role neither had realized was vacant until it was occupied. Mrs. Amira is coming too. She says the planetarium has a new exhibit about Islamic astronomy. Lily's excitement was pure, untainted by recent trauma, her resilience testament to children's capacity for healing when surrounded by love and security. Marcus watched his daughter chatter about constellation myths and Arabic names for stars, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 3 years. Not happiness exactly, Sarah's absence would always ache, but peace, the sense that he was doing right by their daughter, that Sarah's sacrifice in recordings and faith in education as salvation hadn't been wasted. Victoria's hand found his on the bench between them, fingers intertwining with natural ease that suggested this had happened before and would happen again. She'd changed in the months since Sunday's crisis, less focused on quarterly earnings, more attentive to people who made her company function, willing to acknowledge that power carried responsibility beyond shareholder value. The board had questioned some of her decisions, particularly around community investment that didn't promise immediate returns. But the Hassan deal had generated enough revenue and positive publicity that her position was secure. And somewhere along the way, Victoria had stopped caring whether she kept the CEO title if keeping it required becoming someone she didn't want to be. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked when Lily had run back to the swings, needing to burn energy before dinner. "How different my life looks than it did 3 months ago. How I almost let fear and pride destroy the best thing that's happened to me in years." "What's that?" Victoria smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in ways her professional mask never permitted. You, Lily. This, she gestured toward the park, the city, the moment. Real connection with people who see me as human rather than function. It's terrifying and wonderful and nothing like I planned. Marcus understood exactly. His life had been demolished and rebuilt in 3 months. Every familiar structure replaced with architecture he was still learning to navigate. But the new foundation felt stronger, built on truth rather than survival, on community rather than isolation, on hope that occasionally luck favored people who needed it rather than those who'd monopolized it. Lily returned, declaring she was starving despite having eaten lunch 2 hours ago. Marcus stood, brushing autumn leaves from his jeans, extending a hand to Victoria that she accepted with the ease of repeated practice. They walked toward the park's edge, 3 figures among thousands populating Manhattan's Saturday afternoon. A father, a daughter, a woman learning to love them both. Somewhere across the city, a janitor was cleaning an office building and dreaming of tomorrow. Somewhere, a child was learning a new language and building bridges between worlds. Somewhere, broken things were becoming art through the hands of people brave enough to rearrange pieces into new patterns. Marcus Chen looked up at clouds breaking apart to reveal November sky, the kind of pale blue that promised winter, but hadn't quite delivered it yet. He whispered words he'd spoken countless times, but today felt newly true. We did good, Sarah. Our daughter is flying, and I'm learning to fly with her. Victoria heard the whisper, understood it was meant for someone beyond their circle, but included them nonetheless. She squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, acceptance, promised that Sarah's presence didn't diminish what was developing between them, but rather sanctified it. The blessing of someone who'd loved Marcus first and taught him how to love again. Lily skipped ahead, chattering about hot dogs and whether they could stop at the library before dinner because she'd finished the last book Mrs. Amira had assigned and wanted something new. Her voice carried over traffic noise and other people's conversations, distinctive and clear, the sound of potential becoming reality, one question at a time. The American dream wasn't found at the top of glass towers or measured in quarterly earnings. It lived here in the space between surviving and thriving, in the choice to keep climbing when ladders seemed designed to exclude you, in the courage to help others even when you barely had enough for yourself. It was janitors becoming directors, 6-year-olds saving business deals, CEOs learning that people mattered more than profit, billionaires finding purpose through honoring children they'd lost by helping children who remained. Marcus had served in wars, had buried a wife, had cleaned toilets for 7 years while raising a genius daughter on love and library books. He'd survived scandal and suspension, had stood before crowds that condemned him and crowds that celebrated him, had learned that visibility was complicated and invisibility was sometimes protective, but neither defined his worth. He'd learned that real wealth was Lily's laughter, Mrs. Amira's mentorship, Hassan's friendship, Victoria's slow-growing love. Real success was measured in opportunities extended, in bridges built, in the ladder his life was becoming for others who'd follow. Real power was choosing kindness when cruelty was easier, choosing truth when lies were more convenient, choosing to show up when fear suggested hiding. They emerged from the park onto streets that pulsed with Saturday energy, the city's endless appetite for experience and transaction and human contact that could be profound or superficial, depending on choices made moment by moment. Marcus chose profound, chose to see people rather than functions, chose to believe that the universe occasionally conspired to lift people up rather than grinding them down. And in that choice, in that belief, in the hand holding his daughters and the hand holding Victoria's, Marcus Chen found something he'd been searching for since Sarah died. Not happiness exactly, because guilt and sorrow existed together in proportions that shifted but never separated completely. But peace, purpose, the sense that his life mattered beyond survival, that the work he did would ripple outward in ways he couldn't fully trace but could trust, would extend beyond his seeing. Sarah's voice echoed from one of her final recordings. The words burned into Marcus's memory through hundreds of repetitions. Love is wealth. Time is wealth. Knowledge is wealth. We're wealthy in all the ways that actually matter. And if you can teach Lily that truth, Marcus, you've given her everything that counts. He had taught her. And in teaching, he'd learned it himself. And in learning, he'd become the father Sarah knew he could be, the man Victoria was learning to love, the bridge between worlds that his daughter crossed with confidence, born from knowing she belonged wherever her courage and compassion took her. The city lights reflected on wet pavement, creating the illusion of stars beneath their feet, constellations they walked through on their way to dinner and library and home. And if home was still a too-small apartment in Queens, it was also the space they created together. Marcus, Lily, and increasingly Victoria, joined by Hassan's monthly visits and Mrs. Amira's weekly lessons, and the growing community of people who'd chosen to see them, to value them, to build something beautiful from what privilege and prejudice had tried to destroy. Somewhere in that apartment, Sarah's recordings waited to be played again, her voice eternal in digital preservation, her wisdom available whenever Lily needed reminding that her mother loved her still, would always love her, was proud beyond measure of the child she'd helped create, and the father who'd refused to let poverty or grief or the world's casual cruelty diminish what they were building together. The wings were earned, the light was shining, and the angels who cleaned office buildings and raised genius daughters and loved without counting cost were exactly where they belonged. Visible, valued, and finally seen.